It's estimated about 6 million feral pigs are roaming America.
They have so many of them, dude. It's the craziest infestation of animals you've ever seen. You hear them in the bushes, like they sound like demons. They're everywhere. There's so many of them, dude.
That's crazy.
Texas has millions and millions of pigs.
It was 3 or 4 in the morning, somewhere deep in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana. The thermal drone was already airborne, cutting silently through thick summer air above a dark patchwork of sugarcane fields and bottomland hardwood. The ground team below had their eyes locked on a monitor, a glowing feed of orange heat signatures moving through the darkness. 11 feral hogs, a full sounder, moving in their predictable late-night pattern across a farmer's field.
Pigs gone wild. Researchers found that Texas has the worst feral hog problem in the entire country.
The drone operator had seen this 100 times before. Track them. Vector the ground team in, do the work. Routine. Except this time, something was different. As the drone banked slightly to keep the sounder centered on screen, the operator noticed a 12th heat signature creeping in from the tree line. It wasn't rooting through dirt. It wasn't moving in the erratic, scattered pattern hogs move in. It was low. It was deliberate. And it was closing the distance between itself and the sounder with a patience and precision that no hog on Earth possesses. The ground team froze. Nobody had reported a 12th animal. Now here is the question you need to be asking right now. In a state where wildlife managers have spent decades warning that feral hog populations are virtually impossible to control, in a state where nearly 1 million of these animals have turned farmland into a war zone.
You're seeing it in Texas. Texas is probably, in the United States, is the biggest example of what happens when, or the best example of what happens when these feral hogs are just completely out of control. They just devastate these agricultural farms.
Yeah.
They have these farms and they're just getting destroyed.
What on earth could be out there in the dark, stalking 11 of them? Stay with us, because what that drone captured that night didn't just surprise the ground team. It quietly rewrote what scientists thought they understood about Louisiana's wild ecosystem, and it has massive implications for every farmer, hunter, and landowner across the South. Louisiana's 91 million nightmare. To understand why that 12th heat signature mattered so much, you first have to understand just how badly Louisiana has been losing this war. Feral hogs, sus scrofa in scientific terms, are not a new problem in Louisiana. They've been here since the 1500s, brought over by early Spanish explorers as a portable food source. For centuries, they existed in manageable numbers, confined to certain regions, kept in rough check by hunting pressure and habitat limitations. But somewhere along the line, the balance broke. Populations exploded. And by the time wildlife managers started sounding the alarm, these animals had already dug themselves into every single one of Louisiana's 64 parishes. Every single one. Let that sink in. Louisiana has 64 parishes. There is not one, not a single corner of this state that feral hogs have not colonized. They are in the cypress swamps of the Atchafalaya Basin. They are in the rice fields of Evangeline Parish. They have been found rooting through cemeteries in Powhatan, destroying tombstones and grave markers. They have shown up inside the city limits of Houghton. They have been spotted in New Orleans. The economic damage these animals have caused is staggering. An LSU Egg Center study placed the annual cost to Louisiana farmers at $91.1 million. And that figure covered crop losses of $66.2 million and an additional $24.9 million in non-production damages, fencing torn apart, levees destroyed, drainage infrastructure ruined, equipment damaged. 87% of Louisiana farmers surveyed by USDA researchers reported that wild pig activity on their land had increased since 2020, not stayed the same, increased. Think about that from a farmer's perspective. You work all day under a Louisiana sun, fighting weather, markets, and debt. Then, at some point after midnight, several hundred pounds of bristled, intelligent, aggressive animal walks onto your field and systematically destroys what you spent months growing: rice, sugarcane, corn, soybeans, uprooting it, wallowing through it, trampling it. Some streams in central Louisiana have recorded dangerous bacteria levels from the sheer volume of hog waste in the watershed. These animals don't just eat your crops, they contaminate your water. And here is the part that made wildlife managers go pale when they read the numbers. Removing 500,000 hogs a year from Louisiana is not enough to stop the population from growing. The numbers that terrified wildlife managers. This is where the biology of feral hogs becomes genuinely frightening, and where this story starts to feel less like a wildlife documentary and more like a horror film. Feral hogs are, and this is the official scientific designation, not an exaggeration, the most reproductively efficient large mammal on planet Earth. A female hog, called a sow, can reach sexual maturity in as little as 6 months. Once mature, she can produce 2 full litters every single year. Each litter averages between 5 and 6 piglets. Do the math on what that means at scale. In ideal conditions, a single breeding pair of feral hogs can produce dozens of offspring annually, and those offspring begin breeding within their first year of life. The population does not grow linearly, it compounds. Wildlife statisticians determined that to simply prevent the Louisiana hog population from increasing, not reduce it, just keep it flat, you would need to remove between 70 and 75% of all hogs in a given area every single year. That is not a management target. That is a mathematical wall. In 2023 and 2024 combined, roughly 75,000 hog hunters across Louisiana harvested nearly 500,000 animals. Through trapping, traditional shooting, and aerial control. Dr. Rusty Berry, a veterinarian who addressed Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commissioners at a meeting in November 2024, did not mince words. Removing 500,000 pigs every year will not decrease the population. His estimate of the statewide hog population? More than 900,000, and he was careful to warn commissioners that even that number is likely an undercount. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries officially estimates the population at 700,000. The real number is almost certainly somewhere between the two and trending in the wrong direction. Trapper Cade Myers from the Gulf Coast Soil and Water Conservation District put it even more plainly. To keep the population from gradually increasing year over year, you have to catch somewhere near 60% of the animals, and hunters are achieving nowhere near that. The established population they already have is growing. So here is the question that nobody had a clean answer to: if you can't outbreed them, can't outshoot them, and can't outspend them, what stops them? When hunters couldn't keep up, Louisiana tried everything, and the history of that effort tells you something important about why the drone footage from Avoyelles Parish hit so differently. The state made feral hogs what the law calls outlaw quadrupeds, a classification that strips them of nearly all the protections extended to game animals. There is no bag limit on feral hogs, no closed season. You can hunt them year-round, day or night. On private property, landowners and their authorized agents can take hogs after dark using artificial light, infrared sighting devices, laser systems, and night vision equipment, as long as they notify the sheriff's office 24 hours in advance. Sound suppressors are permitted with the appropriate federal permits. Helicopter-based aerial hunting is authorized under permit. Louisiana essentially handed hunters every tool in the toolbox and said, "Go." And still, the population grew. In Natchitoches Parish, a professional hog controller named Shane Kessler turned the fight into a full-time career. Operating as Rougarou Hog Control, Kessler works through long nights, scanning farmland with a thermal drone while a ground team moves in behind him. He estimates he kills around 1,000 feral hogs a year through partnerships with farmers across 8 Louisiana parishes: Natchitoches, Rapides, Avoyelles, Evangeline, Red River, Grant, St. Landry, and Allen, covering roughly 100,000 acres. His operation is a serious one, built around the thermal drone technology that has become the most effective spotting tool in the modern hog hunter's arsenal. And Kessler himself will tell you plainly, even this level of effort isn't enough to stop the population from rising. Then there is the scientific front. 2 LSU researchers spent years developing a hog-specific poison using a common food preservative. Their patent was issued in May 2024. As of this writing, it still cannot be deployed on Louisiana farmland because navigating the EPA's pesticide approval process has proven so bureaucratically complicated that researchers who lack industry backing find it nearly impossible to advance through the system. One of the researchers described spending 6 years trying to secure just a testing permit, only to be buried in hundreds of pages of unrelated chemical documentation and unexplained acronyms. Meanwhile, warfarin, a known environmental toxin that is toxic to far more than just hogs, has been approved as hog bait, largely because it has an existing history as rat poison. Ask yourself this: if the people whose entire professional mission is to stop feral hogs cannot get an effective, targeted solution through the regulatory system, what does nature have up its sleeve that science hasn't figured out yet? The farms fighting back. Before we get to what that drone caught in Avoyelles Parish, you need to understand the terrain where this is all playing out, because the human cost here is personal, and the farmers who have been living this nightmare deserve to be seen. A Louisiana rice farmer in Avoyelles Parish named Thomas Tubry has spent years working alongside people like Shane Kessler, watching that drone monitor in the dark, tracking heat signatures moving through his fields at 2 in the morning. For Tubry and farmers like him, feral hog damage is not an abstract statistic. It is a ripped levee that floods a field you spent weeks preparing. It is a sugarcane section that looks like something detonated in it. It is the bacteria count in your drainage ditch climbing to dangerous levels because a sounder of 30 hogs decided to wallow upstream. Across Louisiana, 87% of farmers say hog activity on their land has increased. More than 70% report that feral swine have directly interfered with their farming operations in the past year. A majority say they are genuinely worried about the safety of themselves, their families, their pets, and their livestock. Nationwide, the numbers are even more sobering. USDA data places total annual agricultural damage from feral hogs at $1.6 billion across just 13 states. Corn alone accounts for $92.2 million in losses. Livestock operations have been hit for $85 million in predation costs, veterinary bills, and pasture destruction. In Louisiana, the feral hog problem is not a rural curiosity or a hunting club inconvenience. It is an active economic emergency, and for a long time, the only answer anyone had was, shoot more of them. But here is where the story gets interesting, because in certain pockets of Louisiana, quietly, without any fanfare, without anyone issuing a press release, something began changing. Reports started filtering in from landowners and hunters about areas where hog populations seemed to be thinning. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. Sounder sizes were smaller. Rooting damage was reduced. Animals that had been a constant presence for years were harder to find. Nobody had changed the trapping pressure. Nobody had deployed a new poison. Nobody had run a helicopter hunt through those specific parcels. Something else was doing the work. Drones enter the war. Understanding what thermal drones actually see at night is critical to appreciating what the Avoyelles Parish footage revealed, because thermal imaging doesn't just show you animals. It shows you the relationship between animals. A thermal drone flying at around 400 feet above a Louisiana field in the dead of summer is picking up heat signatures against a cooler background. Feral hogs glow white-hot on screen. Dense, compact bodies moving in the erratic, snuffling patterns of animals that are primarily focused on rooting for food. A sounder of 11 hogs looks like a cluster of bright blobs, with no particular formation or purpose, spreading out across a field. Doubling back, scattering, reforming. The de-hogiflyer concept, a thermal camera-equipped drone used to spot hogs and vector in ground teams, was pioneered right here in Louisiana. Engineers James Palmer and Cy Brown built one of the earliest models, a Skywalker UAV equipped with a FLIR thermal imaging camera, conducting nighttime flyovers of rice fields being devastated by hogs. Their concept spread. By the mid-2020s, thermal drones had become standard equipment for serious hog control operations across the South. Systems like the Mavic 3 Thermal and the Matrice 30T became industry workhorses, rapid deploy platforms that can cover vast areas of farmland in darkness and detect heat signatures that no spotlight, no trail camera, no ground observer would ever catch. The innovation changed the nature of the fight. With thermal imaging, as one dehogaflyer operator famously said, they have nowhere to hide. But the technology was about to reveal something that had been hiding. In plain sight, something that wasn't a hog at all. The 12th heat signature. Back to Avoyelles Parish, 3:04 in the morning. The drone operator is watching 11 hogs work a field. The ground team is positioned and waiting. The mission is straightforward. And then the 12th heat signature enters the frame from the southern tree line. Here is what immediately separated it from the hogs on screen. It moved differently. While the sounder spread and churned and rooted with the characteristic chaos of feral pigs, the 12th signature moved with stillness broken by bursts of controlled, purposeful motion. It wasn't approaching the field, it was approaching the hogs, low to the ground, pausing, repositioning, covering ground in a way that reflected awareness of the animals it was closing in on. The ground team on the monitor didn't say anything at first. They watched. The 12 heat signatures converged. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. The sounder broke. 11 animals scattering outward from a single point of disruption, their tight grouping exploding into panicked individual retreat. The 12th signature was at the center of the dispersal, and one of the 11 heat signatures on the outside of the scatter was no longer moving. The ground team took several minutes before they moved in to assess what had happened. What they found in that field was not the result of a trap or a rifle. It was the result of something with claws and teeth and 400 pounds of muscle. A Louisiana black bear. What the culprit actually was. Here is something that most people, including many people who live in Louisiana, do not fully appreciate. The Louisiana black bear is a distinct subspecies, Ursus americanus luteolus, recognized as genetically separate from other North American black bear populations. And for most of the 20th century, this animal was functionally gone. By 1992, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed the Louisiana black bear as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, the species had been reduced to a few small, fragmented, and isolated subpopulations concentrated in the bottomland hardwood forests of the Tensas River Basin and the Atchafalaya River Basin. Habitat loss and human-related mortality had pushed them to the edge. The population was so low, so scattered, and so genetically isolated that wildlife biologists were genuinely worried about the species' long-term survival. Recovery efforts began in earnest. Habitat restoration, reintroduction programs, strict protections. It took decades of sustained effort from Louisiana's Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, private landowners, and conservation organizations. But it worked. By March 2016, the Louisiana black bear was officially delisted from the Endangered Species Act, a genuine success story in a field that doesn't produce many of them. Breeding subpopulations had been established in both the Tensas and Atchafalaya basins. Connectivity between populations was confirmed. Long-term viability projections looked, for the first time, genuinely optimistic. And in the years that followed, something quiet began happening across the bottomland forests and agricultural margins of central Louisiana. Bears started moving into Avoyelles Parish, into Evangeline, into St. Landry, into areas that hadn't recorded breeding black bears in living memory. The same parishes, it turns out, where hunters had started noticing something strange. The bear nobody saw coming. Let's be precise about what we are and are not claiming here. Because this matters, Louisiana black bears are not a primary predator of feral hogs in the way that wolves function as apex predators in Yellowstone. Black bears are omnivores. Their diet is dominated by plants, berries, nuts, insects, and carrion. Feral hogs are not on the menu in the way that deer are for a wolf pack. What the drone caught in Avoyelles Parish was not a sustained predation campaign. It was an opportunistic encounter, a large, powerful predator asserting dominance over a food-rich area, probably as much about territorial behavior and protecting a food source as about actively hunting hogs. But here is what ecologists call a fear ecology effect. And it is more powerful than it might sound. The presence of a large predator in a landscape does not just kill the animals it targets. It changes how every other animal in that ecosystem behaves. Prey species and feral hogs, for all their ferocity, are prey to large enough predators, modify their movement patterns, their feeding behavior, their habitat use, and their activity times in response to predation risk. A sounder of hogs that knows a bear is working a particular stretch of bottomland will avoid that stretch. They will feed more cautiously. They will move more at night, or more in daylight, or shift entirely to different areas. Their rooting damage in that specific zone decreases, not because they've been hunted out, but because the calculus of risk and reward has changed. This is the same dynamic that researchers documented in Yellowstone after wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Elk didn't just decline in number. They changed where they grazed, how long they stayed in any given location, and what vegetation recovered as a result. Rivers literally changed course as bank vegetation regrew in areas elk had previously overgrazed. Scientists called it a trophic cascade. One predator reintroduced at the top of a food chain rippled change all the way down to river hydrology. Louisiana is not Yellowstone. Black bears are not wolves. But the principle is the same. And what the thermal drone in Avoyelles Parish captured that morning was the opening frame of a story that Louisiana's landscape has been trying to tell for the last several years, if anyone had been positioned to read it. Now ask yourself this: how many other areas of Louisiana are seeing shifts in hog behavior that nobody has connected to bear recovery? How many farmers who noticed slightly less rooting damage in their back fields didn't know that a black bear had established a territory within 2 miles of their property? What this means for Louisiana's future. Wildlife managers and ecologists are beginning to grapple with what bear recovery means for Louisiana's broader ecosystem, including its feral hog crisis. Let's be clear about the limits first. Louisiana's black bear population, while recovered and delisted, is not enormous. The breeding subpopulation are concentrated in the Tensas and Atchafalaya basins. Bears are moving outward from those core areas, but they are not uniformly distributed across the state. A single bear or a small number of bears moving through a parish cannot replicate what a coordinated, large-scale predator population would accomplish. The idea that bear recovery will solve the feral hog problem is not supported by current evidence. But that is not the point. The point is what it signals. For decades, Louisiana's approach to the feral hog crisis has been almost entirely focused on removal. Kill more hogs, trap more hogs, find a poison that works, fly more helicopters, deploy more drones. Those tools matter, and they will continue to matter. The farmers losing $91 million a year to these animals cannot afford to wait for ecological equilibrium to sort things out. They need boots on the ground, thermal cameras in the air, and every legal tool the state makes available. But the Avoyelles Parish drone footage points to something the removal-only approach has never been able to deliver: behavioral disruption at the landscape level. A black bear moving through a territory doesn't just kill 1 or 2 hogs during a chance encounter. It reshapes how an entire sounder uses that landscape for weeks or months. It keeps them moving, keeps them unstable, reduces the period of time they spend in any one location. And that movement, that instability, reduces the rooting damage, the crop loss, the levee destruction in ways that no trap or rifle can replicate, because traps and rifles work on individual animals. Predation pressure works on behavior. The conservation community is paying attention. Researchers who study predator-prey dynamics in the South are increasingly interested in whether recovering apex predator populations, not just bears, but potentially even cougars, which were historically present across Louisiana and have been recorded in neighboring states in recent years, could serve as a natural pressure valve against feral hog expansion in ways that supplement, rather than replace, active management. The Burger Picture. Here is what the drone footage from Avoyelles Parish ultimately represents and why it matters beyond the borders of Louisiana. The United States is in the middle of a feral hog crisis that is difficult to overstate. Nationwide, USDA data puts annual agricultural damage at $1.6 billion across 13 states. The U.S. population of feral hogs has grown from an estimated 2.4 million animals in 1982 to somewhere between 6 and 9 million today. The World Health Organization recognizes feral swine as the #1 invasive species on Earth. They carry brucellosis, leptospirosis, and pseudorabies, diseases transmissible to livestock, domestic animals, and humans. They contaminate water supplies. They destroy wetlands. They outcompete native wildlife for hard-massed resources that deer and turkeys and countless other species depend on. Every state that has tried to manage feral hog populations through hunting alone has watched those populations continue to climb. The biology simply will not cooperate. You cannot outshoot an animal that breeds this fast, at this scale. The drone footage from Avoyelles Parish doesn't offer a magic solution, but it does offer something more valuable. A reminder that ecosystems are not static. They respond. They shift. They recover capabilities that human activity stripped away, if you give them the conditions to do so. Louisiana's black bear recovery did not happen by accident. It happened because of decades of sustained intentional investment in habitat restoration and species protection. The bear that appeared on that thermal monitor at 3:04 in the morning is the direct result of choices made by wildlife managers, landowners, and conservationists over more than 30 years. The fact that it is now operating in a landscape where feral hogs have become the dominant ecological disruptor is not a coincidence. It is an ecosystem beginning to reassemble itself. The question for Louisiana, and for every state dealing with this crisis, is whether the recovery of natural predator populations can be integrated into a coherent strategy alongside the drones and the traps and the aerial hunts and the EPA-stalled poisons. Whether the answer coming from the scientific community is, yes, these things work together, or no, predators alone can never make a dent. That conversation is only now beginning in earnest. And it started, in some meaningful sense, on a thermal monitor in Avoyelles Parish at 3:04 in the morning, when a ground team watching 11 heat signatures realized there were 12. What comes next? So where does Louisiana go from here? The pressure on farmers is not letting up. The 2024-25 harvest season logged an Avoyelles estimated 674,000 hogs removed statewide, the highest number in recent years, driven partly by increased effort and partly by improved aerial and drone-assisted control programs. And yet, the population remains well above the threshold at which removal has any meaningful impact on growth. Veterinarians and wildlife biologists are still trying to untangle the EPA's pesticide labyrinth to get a targeted hog-specific toxicant through the approval process. Hunters continue to log long nights behind thermal scopes on ground they may never fully reclaim. The drone programs will expand. The thermal technology will improve. The aerial hunts will continue. These are not futile efforts. They protect individual farms, reduce local damage, and provide real relief to real people who are fighting a war of attrition on their own land. Every 1,000 hogs Shane Kessler removes from those 8 parishes is real money saved for the farmers who called him in. But the Avoyelles Parish footage has added a new variable to a conversation that needed one. Wildlife managers are now asking questions they weren't asking 5 years ago. Where are bears establishing new territories? What overlap exists between their range expansion and reported changes in hog behavior? Can targeted habitat management in specific corridors accelerate the kind of natural predation pressure that drones can't replicate? These are not easy questions, but they are the right ones, and they exist because someone was flying a drone at 3 or 4 in the morning over a dark field in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana, and instead of seeing 11 heat signatures, they saw 12. That 12th signature didn't ask for permission. It didn't wait for a study to be published or a bill to pass through the legislature. It walked out of the tree line, did what it was built by 4 million years of evolution to do, and then disappeared back into the dark before sunrise. Louisiana has been fighting the hog war for decades with every tool humans could build. It may turn out that the most powerful tool in the arsenal was already out there, padding silently through the bottomland hardwoods, wearing its own fur and following its own ancient instinct. The question is whether we are smart enough to work with it. If you have seen unusual wildlife encounters on your trail cameras or drone footage in Louisiana or anywhere in the South, drop it in the comments below. The data the wildlife management community needs most right now is coming from people exactly like you. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss what we find next.